Hello and welcome, everybody, to another episode of Coaching from the Heart with myself, Tyler Thurman, and my good friend, colleague, and co-host, Harold Feddersen.
Good afternoon, Tyler.
Harold, it is great to be back with you again this Thursday, as always.
Our ritual Thursday.
I love it more and more as the weeks go by. So let's go ahead and get started. The week's topic is the victim mindset. And so we're gonna dive into that. It's a juicy topic, so we're gonna have some fun with it today, I think, because everyone can relate to being a victim and feeling victimized and all that good stuff. But before we do that, I'm just going to give people a place where they can find both of us. Just as a reminder, both Harold and myself are professional transformative coaches. Means we work with people on a deep level to support them to be more of who they really are and have more wonderful lives. So if that sounds good to you or appealing to you, or you're interested in working with either of us, you can find myself at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. And Harold, how about you?
I can be found at www.haroldfeddersen.ca.
Fantastic. And that is your brand spanking new website. I'm excited about it.
And it is only a week and a half old now.
I like it. It's just a baby in internet time.
It's a newbie. It is not currently trending, so it is still a newbie.
It's gonna get there though, I think. So Harold, you, I believe, are gonna take us. You're gonna start us off setting the table with our topic. So I'm just gonna hand it over to you.
Okay. Yeah, let's hold hands and walk into this water together.
Let's do that.
So the victim mindset. So as you said, we all have this. It's absolutely universal. So let's just kind of put it as plainly as possible, which is the victim mindset is when the other is responsible for anything going on within you. So when we believe another person is responsible for how we feel, for what we're thinking, or what we're doing with our lives. So that's kind of just the real basics of it.
Yeah, simplicity.
Yeah, and it's born from the sense of separation. So in order for there to be a you doing something to a me, there has to be that sense of separation. So that's kind of its birthplace, is in the sense of separation, which is the same birthplace as what you and I have been referring to as the ego, or the ego structure, or the ego space that we live in, some or much of the time, depending on our level of awareness and attachment to it.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of the basic sort of nuts and bolts of it, if you will.
Yeah, and I just want to add in to that, because I think that's it's so well put, the simplicity. I love it. That it doesn't necessarily have to be another person that is the victimizer.
Nice.
Could be the weather, could be a set of circumstances coming together. It could be, if it's an illness, could be a virus, could be, anything that's kind of seems to be imposing its will on our experience of life.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Tyler.
Yeah, because I think it's easy to forget that we can do it with anything, not just other people.
Yeah, it's funny because we were talking before the show, and I was telling you, some of the stuff that I've been working on, and it's directly related to other people, right? So I think that's probably where I was. But yeah, the the other could be, yeah, anything, an inanimate object, a chair. Like, when
Right.
you bump it, you bump into a chair and then you yell at the chair, like the chair, like the chair lunged out and kicked you in the toe. So the other can be anything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to recognize that, I think. But it is, I like what you said, that it's the birthplace of the separated, which really is a world of the world of bodies, right? The physical universe. And it's not just people's bodies, right? So we talk about anything separate from us as a body, right? That's why we call it a body of water, or a body of land, that kind of thing. Um, it's just anything separate from what we think is us, which most of the time is our physical body. So our topic probably gonna include a lot of kind of looking at our identification with the body, because that's a huge part of it. But really, it all starts with the mind, right? But well, let's go with it another way. I realize I kind of jumped into your intro there, Harold, um, but just as let's go back to, this is something we all do. Um, there's the ego mind, just there's this pull towards being a victim or experiencing ourselves as victimized. Um, I'm not going to wait any longer. I told Harold that I couldn't.
Bring it, bring it.
There's a quote I really wanted to share with you all, from A Course in Miracles, which, as many of you know, my spiritual practice. Um, it says, there's a line that says, "Beware the temptation to see yourself as unfairly treated." Uh, and 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 I love that. It sounds kind of ominous at first. Beware, right? But really, all the course is speaking to is the the cause effect relationship of being a victim or experiencing it, and what goes along with it. So beware, if you choose to experience yourself as a victim, um, there's some things that go along with that, like feeling victimized, which if anyone out there has ever felt unfairly treated, just kind of think about it in those terms, because victim sounds kind of scary, right? Just think about unfair, right? That was so unfair. I think we can all relate to that. Right?
Mhm.
Everyone has had something in their life happen, and then we, in a instant, a split second, in the unconscious mind, most likely, decided that was unfair. And then instantaneously, the relationship of victim and victimizer gets created. Um, and just to kind of get in touch with that feeling, it feels awful, but there's a draw to it, right? Because otherwise, why would we do it? Given that, we'll get into more about how it's a choice in a minute. Um, but it feels awful, but there's something in it for us, which is we get to be right. A very common question I ask people is, do you want to be at peace or do you want to be right? And it's a tough question to answer. There's so much desire to be right. Sure, I'm victim. I'm miserable. I'm victimized. This awful thing has happened to me, but I didn't do it. and I'm right about that. Those are two things we get to hold on to, that we cherish in a lot of ways.
And that might be the place where people can make the connection to as well, because we've all been, let's say we've been in an argument where all we're really trying to do in the argument is be the one that's right, or have the other person recognize our rightness. We're not in the argument to find the truth. We're in the argument to be right. And it comes that is the same kind of flavor that we're speaking about before. You know, it's that say comes from the same place.
Yeah, yeah, so true. It and as with pretty much everything we talk about, to do with the human experience, it's never wrong, right? So what Harold and I, as best we can, are never going to make you wrong for feeling what you're feeling. Especially when it's something that we all do, right? That the hypocrisy there would just be too much to bear.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are offering is another way to see it, because what we don't know is that the experience of being a victim or being unfairly treated is on some level up to us. Now, it never feels that way. And my experience of why that is because it's because of our lack of capacity to separate out two things: the outside and the inside, right? So that we've got the event that we're feeling victimized about, right? Whatever happened. So could have been somebody did or said something in our general direction, right? Or like I said before, it doesn't have to be to do with somebody else. You know, we got sick, or our body got sick. Like you said, Harold, we stubbed our toe on the chair. It literally could be anything.
Mm-hmm.
There's the event, and then there's our experience, our interpretation of it as good or bad, basically, to put it simply, right? But in the context of this conversation, personal, right? It was personal. It was done to me, and that's kind of the crux of it. I think is we can't see very easily until we start looking that those are two different things. That we don't necessarily get a choice in what happens to our bodies, right? As we move throughout the world, as we engage with the world, and we do different things, we live our lives. Things happen, right? One of my mentors, he's passed now, Sydney Banks. He used to say, "Life is a contact sport." Right? It's or the more common term would be shit happens, right? But then something else is available, is what's within the mind, which is where the human experience gets created fundamentally. And if we don't know that those are, they're sort of different steps in the process, then we're liable to keep mistaking ourselves as victims, because all we see is the event. We don't see that there has to have been an interpretation, a judgment, some thinking about that event in order for us to feel victimized. And that's the level of, that's the level that we don't see. We don't see things happening.
I think an interesting spot we can also look at within ourselves, and we, in our work, it's easy for us to catch this because it's we're on the other side. We're on the other side of the microphone, but is in our language. Like if we look at the common cold, for example, you know, the common cold is always around. Like, it's not like the common cold shows up only from December 3rd to January 17th or something. So the common cold is always out there. But when people speak about the cold, they're like, I caught the cold, or so-and-so gave me the cold. And there's a way of languaging it that you can hear the victim or the unfairly treated in the way it's languaged, right? Instead of because I always equate you know, our victimness with not being responsible, because which is ultimately what it is. We're not taking responsibility for our experience. We're putting our experience on another. Like, we are experiencing this because of them. So if we look at just the common cold, which is, you know, it's always in the air, a different kind of languaging would be, you know, I didn't keep my immune system up, therefore I became susceptible and allowed this thing to take over my body system, right? And it's interesting when we start to listen to ourselves talk, how we can hear whether we're being responsible or whether we're being a victim. Sure. Which is that's kind of that's the arena that I've been playing with for the last week, again, for the 50 millionth time, because it just keeps coming back to it. It's funny, I was in my basement working on some renovations, and I just had to stop because I had this realization that was big for me, but about responsibility, because I thought I had crossed the threshold. I thought I was on the other side of responsibility, right? And I just heard myself, and I said, "Oh man, you just find new depths to it. Like, you just find new depths and new places where the awareness of your victimness lay dormant, and so the you know, the awakening of the responsibility of that has not occurred."
I like that, because as practitioners, it's very easy to fall prey to that. You know, to thinking, oh, you know, I've had that conversation with myself before. Clearly, I'm never gonna take on the victim role again.
No, I'm safe now.
I'm safe now. Yeah, so true, so true. And that it goes deep in my experience, and I think it's not this superficial thing. For me, it's a spiritual conversation. And to be honest, to be fair, most things for me become spiritual conversations.
Everything is a spiritual conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll just put that over that. But put the caveat in. But to me, you know, I like simplicity, right? So for me, the way that I tend to talk about it is, if it looks like it can take the peace of God from you, that thing that's separate from you, that's believing yourself to be a victim. Now, because it's literally impossible for the peace of God to leave us, then something about the victim mindset has to be an illusion, right? Because certainly when you're in it, it feels real.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can attest to that just as much as anybody, right? You just like, that SOB, cut me off. How dare they? um, or it could be something, with a more personal relationship, but it feels real. But because the essence or the truth of it is not, um, there's got to be some level of decision involved, some level of choice, because there's this thing that's so beautiful within all of us, that this divinity, um, this love and peace, and yet so often we don't experience that. Um, And now you could just chalk it up to a vengeful, wrathful God and conditionally loving God, which, in fairness, many people do. Uh, but to me, it looks more like, okay, there's this ever-present beauty within everybody, right? Everybody, no exceptions. And to varying degrees, we decide we don't want that. uh, and then we have some thinking that leads us in a different direction, right? Which for the purposes of this conversation, we'll call that victim thinking, right? But it really is as simple as anything you think can get in between you and the beauty within, that is our true nature, is the choice to be a victim. Now, it doesn't look like a choice because it's largely unconscious, but it's there on some level. And the reason I emphasize the choice part is because if there were no choice, then we really would truly be victims, right? In a true cosmic sense, right? If there was no way around being a victim, which in my experience there always is, then there's got to be an element of choice, unless it's really true that we are just kind of screwed, and that's not my experience. Right? And some people, of course, are more screwed than others, in that
And
example.
and you can there's a choice, because when you're in that heated argument, the one where you're trying to prove that you're right, at any moment you can actually just stop and change the conversation you're creating with the other person. I remember doing this with a friend of mine, someone him and I were really, really close, and we were having I had said something. I definitely started it, as I usually do. I had said something through email which triggered him, and we started this back and forth in this email, and I just caught it, and I said to myself, Harold, this is not the conversation you want to be in. Like, this is someone you care very deeply for, and this conversation is not a reflection of who you want to be, and it's not a reflection of the relationship that you have with this person. So I said, you know what? I said, I realized I said this and you said that. I said, but really, and I just got to the truth of it, and I owned all of the stuff in the conversation that we had been having up to that point. And I said, this is the truth as I see it. And it stopped the conversation that we were having and created a new conversation. And then he
Yeah.
had this very loving and soft reply, which is his nature. And that was it. The conversation had just shifted, and it's one person being willing to stop and own what they're creating in that conversation.
Yeah.
To stop the
Yeah, and it can
stop
be a
the.
conversation between ourselves too, right? Just,
Mhm,
I like just to, something happened to us. Maybe um, something happened to your body, right? That it got sick, it got crippled, maybe in a permanent way, right? And
mhm,
the truth is, yes, that happened. See, very easily you can interpret this conversation as the denial of the physical reality. That's not what we're talking about,
mhm,
right? Absolutely, that happened to you. Um, you know, things happen to our bodies that sometimes are irreversible. And one of the things that always happens that's irreversible is aging. Right? Um,
unless you
and
share.
well, that
She
could
is
be.
somehow she is not. There's technology. No, sorry.
She maybe she slowed the process, Harold. I don't know if
Yeah,
she beat it entirely.
I don't know either.
But here's the thing: is the the truth of the physical the physical universe. That's the truth, and part of being a victim, really all of being a victim, in fairness, is the decision to push back with the mind, right? Pushing back with the body is fine, right? If you're in this situation um, that you know maybe you have a spine injury or something, and there's a 1 in 100 chance that you'll receive or you'll recover the use of your legs again. That can happen, right? Physically, you might push the limits of your rehab to see if you can get back what you lost. Um, but on the level of the mind, what what we do is we create pushing back against what is, and we say, "This happened to me. Oh, woe is me! Isn't it so horrible? Isn't it so awful?" Um, and then we kind of live. We live in that. We marinate in that for years sometimes, and it just creates this awful experience of that thing that happened, right? See, we think the things that happen to us cause our experience, our human experience of life. That is a fundamental misunderstanding, right? It's very difficult to understand kind of overcoming or letting go of being a victim without first seeing what happens to me doesn't cause the inside, not the inside the body, but inside the mind, right? So this shows up in relationships, like intimate romantic relationships, a lot. um, and I can attest to that because I'm in one, like a lot of people. um, Now, in all fairness, mine's pretty wonderful most of the time. Um, but I probably find better examples looking back on past relationships. But it looks an awful lot like when people behave in certain ways. That is the source of my upset, right? I mean, most people in relationships has your spouse or your your significant other, have they ever done something and then you experience that as um, they they sort of took my happiness from me because they did that? A lot of people experience that as true. They think that can actually happen. And that is, in a nutshell, what being a victim, what choosing to be a victim is. It's not seeing fundamentally, first of all, that we have innate mental well-being. We have this essence, this love deep down that can't be harmed by anything. But it's thinking the world is, our experience of life is outside in. It's something happens, therefore I feel that I have to experience it this way. And that is simply not true. And all you need to begin to let go of experiencing yourself as a victim in your life is just be willing to take a second look. And it will make all the difference in the world. Because the truth is there to see. Right? What we do is we perpetrate lies in our life, false beliefs. I think, didn't we have a show on beliefs last week, Harold?
Mm-hmm. Beyond belief.
Beyond belief. Yeah, this conversation is the same thing, right? As are all of our conversations. The heart of the conversations are pretty much all the same, right? There's a deeper truth. The deeper truth is we can't be victimized at the level of our spirit. Our body certainly can be, right? People can do things to our body that are just awful, horrible things. And I wouldn't for a second say that those things can't happen because we know that they can. And I would never for a second say that those are good things, right? They're not. But the truth of who we are runs much deeper than just our physical experience of life. There's something unremembered or forgotten, I guess would be the word. Something forgotten by most of us about who we really are. And that really is the key to seeing past ourselves as victims, is seeing that there's more to us than meets the eye.
You know, your question, what was the question you had? Will this take the peace of God for me? I think is what you.
Yeah, can this?
Can this, yeah. And I think it might be valuable on a practical note to have because I use questions as well. So that sounds like a question. It's almost like that question is just always available for you in your day-to-day movement. And
Sure.
I think I have similar questions, and it's good to have a question like some question that actually as soon as you ask the question, it takes you outside of the conversation you're in. So for me, it's usually, what is true in this? What is the truth in this?
Yeah.
Another one is, am I just trying to be right? Because that's a strong one for me.
Which is the flip side of what's the truth in this, right? Because
yeah,
do I want to see the truth or do I want to be right?
yeah. Because as soon as we bring in a question, an open question,
And a legitimate question that we're willing to ask, to actually ask and wait for an answer.
Yeah. then we can access something that is outside of the little battle that we're in, either against, the weather or another person, because
Yeah.
that's where you're going to actually do your practice of stopping
Mm.
the automatic programming that is running, that has you constantly being victimized in whatever your particular thing is, whether it's at work
Yeah.
or relationship or inside or with nature or
I like that you brought up the automatic programming, because to me that speaks to the kind of the nature of the ego. Like the ego mind, the part of our mind that I talk about as the ego is the part of us that likes to be apart, separate, right? That's how we started the conversation. Um, and it's just it, it's easy to see if you get curious. Let's look at what being a victim actually does to us. It drives us further apart, right? Like if I'm a victim of you, um, that probably means I don't like you, first of all. But more importantly, I'm going to build up some defenses to help prevent me being victimized again. Now, on a physical, practical level, that is totally cool. Right? I'm all for protecting your physical well-being. Um, and at the same time, seeing what you're doing on the level of the mind. Because if you wall yourself off to more and more and more people to a greater and greater degree, thicker and thicker walls, stronger material, right? Steel instead of wood. Um, you drive a wedge between you and your fellow human beings. And it's just, it gets lonely and um, and miserable and scary, right? And we don't see that when I take on that role, I get more of that. And to be
yeah,
honest with you, that sucks. Sorry, go ahead, Harold.
because the separation, like part of the ego's role is to keep itself. So it's created by definition by believing it's separate, and
Self-preservation, right?
yeah, and it continues to preserve itself by proving separation. So when you bring a question, um, like what is true in this, into it, it automatically creates the opportunity for that sense of separation to sort of fall away, and and an invitation, in a sense, into a much larger space.
Yeah.
Because the ego, it wants to keep us in our heads. And for me, whenever I ask a question like, what is true in this, I have to get down into my body again,
Mm.
because you can't sense the truth of what you are, or what reality is, from inside your head, because inside of your head is just this giant galaxy of thoughts and waypoints of constellation that, um, it's like this thing. So you get down into your body, and then you can become part of the whole truth of it. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And a
okay,
question I've heard you ask before, Harold, is am I in my head or am I in my heart?
Yeah, that's one of
And
my that's one of my big ones.
yeah, and I think that speaks to what you're speaking to.
Yeah, because for me, my experience, because I lived, God, decades, just decades up in the galaxy up there, man, because it's infinite. Like there's so much. It's you can spend your whole life up there and just be. It's amazing. It's awesome.
Yeah, the first time I sort of realized or had an epiphany that you can think and believe anything.
Hmm.
That's how powerful the mind is, right? Now, the flip side of that is you can believe a whole lot of false stuff, stuff that's just not true. And
Hmm.
it can throw us for a loop. And the victim mindset is one of those things that's not true.
And as we covered last week, all beliefs are false when it comes to your experience. Because if you're up in your head in a belief, you're actually separate
Right.
from, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good
like
point.
there was a time where I wanted to work with golfers, because I have a bit of a had a bit of a passion for golf, and one of my favorite sayings was always, "You have never hit a golf ball with your thoughts. You have to hit a golf ball with your body. You have to,
Right.
like your Sydney Banks statement. Life is a contact sport. You have to be in life through your body. You can only love through your heart, and the heart is what gets crushed when that love shifts or moves away in some way, right? So it's easy and it's safe. And this is why the ego would prefer we stay in our heads. It's safer to be in our heads and separate and be right about being victimized than it is to sink down into some of the more painful things that come with that interpretation. But it's
And I just want to put in there, I would argue that it's seemingly safer.
yeah, say more about that.
Yeah, so the illusion of safety is in separation, right?
Hmm.
Oh, I've got my fortress, right? I've built the walls. Um, and it's just not, right? So in the physical world, yeah, there are boogeymen, right? There are people that, can harm us physically. Um, and the level of spirit, there is nothing to be protected from. So to build up walls is only to put up barriers between you and that deeper love that is you. So really, yeah, it looks safer. Um, you would say, "Oh, I don't want to be vulnerable." Well, you really can't be vulnerable on the level of your spirit. Um, you certainly can be physically, and you can be psychologically. Um, but I'm talking on the deepest level possible here. We are fundamentally, one of my favorite terms that the Course in Miracles uses again and again is, we are unassailable. There's nothing to assail. There's no castle to, that can be climbed over, or there, there. The truth of who we are, it doesn't need protection. The us that we think we are, it needs a whole lot of protection, right? Because it's as flimsy as a house of cards. So that's what's not safe. And to be fair, yeah, no, it's not safe, but who cares?
And when it's interesting because when you said that, what I was thinking about was, we can hide out in our heads all the way until the end. we can safely hide out in the up in our space, up in our heads until the end. If you've ever spent
Sure.
any time with someone who's in the transition, passing through from this life, almost always there's an inevitable sinking. Like it's like gravity takes over, and you end up dropping down from your head into your heart, and then everything becomes real again.
Mm.
And that often happens for us when we have some kind of a trauma, big events in our lives, like someone close passing. It reawakens. It's almost like it slaps us back into reality, um, where we're forced to drop down into our bodies and drop down into our hearts.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's an interesting, and in my experience, inevitable um, process. So I like to invite it, because um, the more we practice sinking down, the more facility we have with it, and the more fearless we become in our willingness to brush into life, and as your Sydney Banks, be in full contact with life.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, I think we do have to be a little bit careful because, those same things can happen in our life that you're speaking to, and we can use them. Again, emphasis on make a choice. There's a choice there to use that as an excuse to wall yourself off even further. Right?
Yeah, because sorry, I cut you off there, but
No, that's okay.
because the event happens, I remember. Probably, I don't know if I should use family members as examples, so I won't. But
Keep the names out of
yeah,
it,
keep the
Harold.
names quiet. Um, but an event can happen, and then you're snapped down right into your heart, and your heart is broken. And then because you've had no kind of support with that, being in that space. Yeah, just like you said, immediately it's like, whoa, this is way too much, and you actually try and sort of cement yourself in from here up. Try and
Yeah.
put in the mortar and bricks. So yeah, that can be the bounce back. But there is, in order for that bounce back to occur, there has to be that touching um, into the heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've actually met people on their deathbeds, because that's kind of what you were talking about earlier, that fought it the whole way.
Hmm.
Right? So it doesn't have to go sinking into your heart. Um, you can go, you can not go quietly into the night, right? There's plenty of people who refuse to make peace with what is,
Hmm.
or I like to think of it as allow peace to wash over them,
Hmm.
right?
Because
Because
that's where the beauty, that's where the God, all the good stuff is in that, when you let go of it and just sink into it. You
right.
know, that is where all of the that's where it all is. The whole kit and caboodle.
And of course there's I think it's just helpful to know whenever we're talking about anything like this, there's gonna be resistance to this because of that ego self-preservation, right? Because, like you said, that's where the good stuff is. Yeah, but it doesn't look good when we're in a certain mindset, right? It's scary as hell to let our guards down. It
Hmm.
looks like there's something real, that like the monsters under the bed are real, right?
Hmm.
They look real from where a lot of people are standing. And so I think, one, honor the resistance and honor the fear too, because It's only natural from what you're looking at, from the perspective of somebody who thinks they have been victimized. The monsters look real, right? Now, some people, again, I'm really trying to do my best to speak descriptively about the mind, not the body, and not what happens to the body. Um, because, and I think it's an important distinction that I'll just bring up again, because it's so easy to miss that if somebody did something violent or harmful to your body, I'm not saying that's okay, that that's a good thing, that you should welcome that in. You should let all things go and say, yeah, do whatever you want. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying do what you know to do to physically take the best care of yourself you can, all the while exploring for yourself that deeper part of yourself. Okay, yes, this awful thing happened to me. Maybe you were raped, maybe you got in an awful car accident, and your body's never going to be the same again. Those things happen every day to lots of people, and they're awful. I would never wish them on anybody. I would never try to invite them on myself. But if you find yourself there from that place, again, while doing what you know how to do to take care of yourself physically, are you willing to take a second look at the truth of who you are? Because on one hand, you could say, this thing happened to me. And sure, physically, I'll never be the same again. But on the level of the mind, we get to say, okay, I'll never be again the same again here either, which that's a lie. That's the victim mindset. Or you can look towards the truth, which is something far more beautiful. But there's going to be some resistance in the way. And you're not going to get widespread agreement. Right? Your friends aren't going to agree with you that you're not a victim because they believe it too. You know, most of the world does. That's one of the reasons we're here, to live out our victimhoodness, right? According to the ego. Because to have being separate be meaningful, we got to have victims and victimizers to reinforce the separation, right? Like Harold so beautifully said in the beginning. So I think we're kind of coming to the end here, Harold. But what are some things you'd just like to leave people with about this conversation? A parting shot, if you will.
Oh, nice. When we first start to take responsibility for our experience, it's usually our emotions and our thoughts. But when we first start to take responsibility for our experience, it is very uncomfortable because there is a comfort in blaming. It's like, oh, well, you did this to me, or I feel this way because you said that. There's a comfort in that. So at first, there is a real resistance to entering into it, into being responsible for what we're creating within ourselves. Um, But once you get facility with it, there's a real freedom in it, because now all of a sudden no one else is actually controlling how I feel. No one
Mm,
else is controlling how I'm experiencing my life or what I'm doing with my life. Um,
right.
but there's the threshold of discomfort, because it that we have to go through in order to get to that. So there's the, you
Right.
know, the top layer of the comfy icing of the cake, if you will, that that's really comfy because we've been doing it, you know, our whole lives. And then there's the sort of really just uncomfortable part. Um, you know,
Yeah.
like I experienced, you know, downstairs working. It's like, oh, son of a, this I am responsible for this. This isn't on the other person. It doesn't matter who that person is being. I am responsible for who I am being in that relationship. Um,
Mm,
so there's that. There's the discomfort that we do have to enter. We come face to face with it because we're owning it. We're owning it that I'm creating this. And then
right.
once we get strong enough with it, then we're free in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways that we could never be free before.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So that's
Because
that.
it's really well said, I think, because it's all about freedom. But first, there's that there's that resistance. There's that part of our mind that loves to be a victim, right? So it's worth looking at that and say, because if it's a choice, and Harold and I are presenting it as a choice on some level, not a level you're aware of now, so don't beat yourself up about that, right? As you become more aware of it, then you can begin to actually make different choices. But looking and seeing, okay, if it's choice, then part of me has to want this to choose it. And so we have to look at that and see, oh, you know what? I'm taking a second look. And no, I don't want that. I don't want to be a victim. I go back to the uh, the quote I read in the beginning: "Beware the temptation to see yourself as being unfairly treated." Right? There's a temptation there. There's a draw of some kind because it feels familiar. It feels um, like I think you said cozy or something, Harold. So something that is just we like it. For lack of a better term, we get off on it without knowing it. Um, and so all we're talking about here is let's create some awareness. Let's look. Let's discover this for ourselves. Regardless of what you've been through in your life, you don't have to continue to experience yourself as a victim. And that is absolutely the truth. Whether you want to or not, that's up to you. So I think that's kind of a good place to wrap it up for today's show. But just again, as a reminder, if you enjoyed this conversation with Harold and myself, please reach out to us. We love hearing from you guys. Ask us questions, anything you want to see in our coming episodes. We're happy to hear feedback about that.
Topic
Um,
ideas.
even though you may have noticed most of these conversations end up very similar, because at the heart of them is what is at the heart of all of us, right? So, but if you want to reach out to us either about the show or about working with us as professional coaches, you can find me at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. And you, Harold?
www www.haroldfeddersen.ca.
Fantastic. And so until next time, uh, with all the love in the world, take care.